Figures released this week suggest that an entire generation is being locked out of the Australian dream of home ownership. The data released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics indicates that the number of first home buyers is at its lowest level in close to a decade. The amount of new mortgages has dropped almost 4% in a month, and economists say investors are to blame. The Citizen visited activist economist Carl Fitzgerald from Prosper Australia to gain a better understanding of the situation.
Interested in economic justice. We believe that the value of the earth is significant and should be the basis of our economic system, our tax system. One of the big issues is the number of investors in the market. There's something like 1.5 million investors who have used negative gearing. In the mid-80s, investors were just 12% of the market, and now they're at 36% of all housing loans here in Australia. We've seen all around the world big corrections in the UK, in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and of course in America. We estimate that over 150 of the 193 nations on this planet have suffered from property bubbles in the last decade.
What are the key factors that are contributing to this situation?
At the federal level, the big one is negative gearing. That's what has to go. To think that 92% of all negative gearing borrowings buy existing property. So only 8% adds to supply. And we need more supply to push prices down. The other big one is the exemption for self-managed super funds. Just in the last couple of years, they can buy residential and commercial property, and if they're aged in the over 55 and sell in that post-55 bracket, they get a total exemption on capital gains tax. And that's a huge impost that we're fearing will be as damaging to housing affordability as what negative gearing is. And of course, the big one, if you want to get rid of investors, is to reimpose a federal land tax. The first tax Australia ever had on a federal level was the federal land tax. So in a world of tax havens and tax dodging, you can't hide land.
Carl says the existing tax incentives coupled with the current level of low interest rates also has the effect of driving up the price of private rentals. This affects around 30% of Australia's population, but impacts on low income earners hardest. The Australian Council of Social Service estimate that up to 1 million Australians living within the most vulnerable wage bracket are spending more than a third of their income on rental housing. Jenny Smith, CEO of Council to Homeless Persons, believes the situation is reflected in the large increase in homelessness since 2006.
The last census told us that homelessness had gone up by 20%. So that's a really tough figure to come to grips with when you think about the affluence of our society and the sorts of lives that most of us lead. How can it be that homelessness is growing? And I think when we look at the housing industry over time, it goes up and down. But there's no doubt that the availability of housing and the affordability of housing in our community has been trending in the wrong direction for a long time now. And we're really seeing the results of that. So I think we can look at short-term up and down trends, but over the medium to longer term, housing is less affordable than it's ever been, and that is really contributing to the growth of homelessness in our community.
What is the state of, what's the conditions on the ground for people that are finding themselves facing housing distress?
Well, in terms of people becoming homeless, there are different groups of people that become homeless, but the biggest group, which might surprise you, is families, women and children in particular, and women and children in particular escaping family violence. They're probably the biggest single group that we have. I think we all think of people that we see sleeping rough around the city, and they are a significant and important group, but a much smaller group than families that are breaking up and young people leaving home in distress.
With the current price of housing, the cost of rental, they are not providing any solution for the people, particularly the most vulnerable and desperate people who are out there on the streets. And that includes quite a lot of children as well. It's about a quarter of the people who are homeless, sort of children and families, and sort of people fleeing domestic violence. And we need to have more social housing, we need to have more public housing. There's been a huge reduction in the amount of social and public housing, just hasn't kept pace with the increasing population, and so increasing stress on people being able to afford somewhere to live.
Rents are continuing to increase right across the country, including here in Melbourne. But it's a real challenge for people. It's one of the biggest, well, I should say it's the biggest household costs for lower income, or I'd even go as far as say most households, and it's been increasing more in real dollar terms more than any other essential cost as well. It puts a lot of pressure on people. It means that some people are forced to decide between going to the doctor, filling a medical script that they might have for medication, the educational supports for their children. These are long-term problems that are caused by people being forced into short-term decisions on how they're going to pay rent.
Marcus Westbury from the non-profit community group Renew Australia says there could be a parallel between rejuvenating disused commercial space for greater public amenity and resolving the disparity in the housing market.
So Renew Australia works with probably another part of the property industry that doesn't work so well, like empty shops and offices around the country, and we basically work with property owners and communities to take spaces that are vacant or sitting empty and make them available to creative and community projects. I think you have to create a system that provides incentives for people to use property, not just to hold it and not just to sit on it. And I think that's a big part of our work. Part of that's direct funding, part of it's regulatory, part of it's in the tax system, but it's really important that someone thinks about it from that point of view and argues for it from that point of view.